Snow kept falling like ashes from a broken sky. Along the empty Vermont highway, a small figure stumbled through the storm, a 7-year-old girl barefoot clutching a heavy bundle wrapped in a thin grey blanket. The wind howled against her, but she didn't cry. Her lips were purple, her breath came in short clouds of pain. At the end of the frozen road stood a wooden cabin where she used to live. Its windows were shattered, its door half open, swinging under the storm's rage. She had come back for the only thing that mattered, her little sister. When Emma reached the doorway, her hands shook so hard she almost dropped the bundle. She knelt, brushing off the snow that had gathered on it. Beneath the blanket lay a tiny girl, no older than 3, her skin pale as porcelain fingers still curled around a purple yarn bracelet their mother had made last Christmas. Emma whispered through her chattering teeth, "It's okay, Lily. I'll find someone to bury you. You won't be cold anymore." A shout tore through the wind behind her. "Get out, you and that dead brat. I told you bad luck stays outside." The landlord slammed the door and silence swallowed the valley again. Emma didn't move. She sat in the snow, rocking gently, her tears freezing before they fell. Before we begin this story, take a slow breath. Wherever you're watching from tonight, drop your city in the comments below. Let's share one quiet heartbeat for every child who ever stood alone in the cold. Headlights cut through the white darkness. A sleek black Cadillac Escalade rolled to a stop beside her. Inside sat Mason Reed, 42, a widowed millionaire, known for his quiet success and deeper loneliness. For 3 winters, he had driven these same roads after midnight, chasing ghosts he could never bury the wife and daughter he lost in an avalanche. When he spotted the small figure kneeling in the snow, something inside him broke open. He stepped out the cold, slicing through his coat, his breath turning to smoke. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "What are you doing out here?" Emma looked up, her eyes wide, glassy, full of exhaustion. She held out the blanket as if offering it to him. "Please, bury my sister." Mason froze. The storm seemed to stop, the world shrinking to the trembling child before him. For a moment, he saw his own daughter's face, the same eyes, the same helpless cold. He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "Not tonight," he murmured, taking off his coat and wrapping it around her. "She deserves peace. And so do you." As he lifted her into his arms, the snow swirled around them like white fire. The headlights faded behind their steps. For the first time in 3 years, Mason Reed didn't walk away from the storm. He walked into it carrying someone else's world. The heater hummed softly inside the Escalade, fighting the chill that crept through the glass. Emma sat in the back seat, her small legs tucked under Mason's heavy coat. Her hair, damp with melted snow, stuck to her cheeks. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just stared at the bundle resting in her lap. Inside the thin grey blanket, her little sister's hand was still visible, frozen stiff, clutching the purple yarn bracelet like it was still life itself. Mason adjusted the rearview mirror to see her. She looked too calm for a 7-year-old who had just lost everything. He cleared his throat gently. "What's your name, Emma?" she whispered. "She's Lily. She doesn't like the dark." Her words trembled at the edges, barely holding together. Mason felt the air grow heavy. He turned up the heater, not because of the cold, but because silence was starting to hurt. They drove for miles through the white wilderness. Snow drummed softly on the windshield, the rhythm like a broken lullaby. In the distance, faint city lights blinked under the fog. Burlington was still awake. Emma's eyes followed the snowflakes sliding down the window. "Mom said snow is heaven's blanket," she murmured. But heaven took her first, and then took Lily too. Her voice cracked on the last word. Mason looked at her reflection in the mirror, a child trying to speak like an adult because no one else would. She traced the bracelet on her wrist, purple threads faded but unbroken. She made us these before she got sick. Said the color meant hope. I think I ran out of that. Mason's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He remembered another bracelet, pink plastic beads, half melted when they found it in the wreckage. His daughter's name spelled across it, Grace. 3 winters had passed, and yet the sound of her laughter still echoed every time the snow fell. At a red light, Mason turned to face Emma. Her eyes were hollow, the kind of emptiness that doesn't belong in a child's face. Do you have anyone left, Emma? She shook her head. Just her. And maybe God. But he's been quiet too. The light changed. He drove on slowly, headlights brushing across the snow like fading stars. Maybe he sent me instead, Mason said almost to himself. Emma's eyelids fluttered. Exhaustion won. She leaned against the seat, her breath shallow but even. Mason reached over gently, tucking the blanket higher under her chin. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. The air smelled like snow and old grief, but also like something returning. They passed a church, its bell tower glowing faintly through the storm. Mason slowed down, looking at the cross lit by a single lamp. The word hope was carved into the wooden door. He exhaled, long and slow. You're safe now, kid, he whispered. I promise. The car rolled forward, tires whispering over snow. Outside, the storm finally softened, and for the first time in 3 years, Mason Reed felt the faint warmth of being alive again. By the time they reached St. Mary's Hospital, the storm had eased into a whisper. The building stood like a white ghost against the night sky, its lights flickering through the fog. Mason carried Emma in his arms, her head resting on his shoulder, the grey blanket still wrapped tight around the small body she refused to let go of. Inside, the warmth hit like a wave. Nurses glanced up, startled by the sight. A man in a soaked coat, snow in his hair, and a child clutching another in silence. She's freezing, Mason said, voice rough. And there's a body. Her sister. The nurse hesitated. We need a guardian's name for admittance. Use mine, he interrupted. Mason Reed. For a moment, the nurse blinked. Everyone in Vermont knew that name, the real estate magnate who'd vanished from public life after the avalanche. But the way he stood now, trembling eyes rimmed red, made him look nothing like the man in the magazines. Emma stirred, her voice small. Don't let them take her away. They won't, Mason promised. Not without you. Doctors rushed in, guiding them down the hall. Mason laid the little bundle on the gurney himself, hands shaking as he let go. He'd buried one child before this time he couldn't. While nurses examined, Emma Mason stood near the doorway, staring at the body under the white sheet. The tiny hand still clutched the purple bracelet. He reached out, brushing his thumb over it. You kept her warm as long as you could, he whispered. You did more than most grown men ever would. A voice behind him broke the quiet. Mr. Reed, she needs rest. We'll run some tests, but the girl is stable. He nodded, but didn't leave. Through the glass wall, he saw Emma lying under a heated blanket. Her eyes half open, watching him, the first flicker of trust in her gaze. He walked to her bedside, kneeling down so she could see his face. You're safe now, Emma. I'll take care of everything. That's a promise. Even Lily, she asked softly. He paused, his throat tightening. Especially Lily. Her lips trembled into the faintest smile before sleep claimed her. Mason stood watching the snow swirl outside the hospital window. The storm had ended, but the world still looked cold. He took a slow breath, feeling the weight of his promise settle in his chest, the kind that doesn't fade when the weather clears. No child alone, he whispered, as the monitor beeped softly beside her, steady, alive and fragile as hope. By morning, the storm had cleared, leaving the city washed in white silence. Inside St. Mary's Hospital, the world smelled of disinfectant and fading prayers. Emma sat up in bed, small and pale, a bandage around her wrist. The blanket she held was empty now. Lily's body had been taken to the morgue for procedure. Mason stood by the window, staring at the snow-covered parking lot. He'd spent the entire night filling out forms, signing papers, trying to make sense of rules that didn't care about mercy. When he asked to see the morgue, the nurse hesitated. "You'll need authorization from the Child Welfare Office, sir. The girl's not under your custody." "Then give me the form. They're closed on weekends." That was the moment something cracked inside him. He turned to Emma. "I'll bring her back to you. I promise." The door opened. A woman in a grey wool coat stepped in, tall, sharp, and utterly dry-eyed. Her badge read Creston, Vermont Child Services. "Mr. Reed," she greeted coldly. "I was told you brought an orphan here without guardianship documents." Mason squared his shoulders. "She was freezing to death in the snow with her dead sister. I didn't stop to ask for paperwork." Creston's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You can't just take children off the street, even if you think it's noble. We'll transfer her to a foster shelter while we process the case." Emma's eyes widened. "No, please. I can't leave without Lily." The woman sighed, glancing at the nurse. "The body's already been tagged for burial by public service. The hospital can't hold it indefinitely." Mason stepped forward. His voice dropped lower, colder. "Then I'll pay for it myself. A private burial." "That's not how the system works," Creston replied. "It's policy." Her tone was mechanical, almost proud of its cruelty. Mason looked down at Emma's trembling hands, at the bracelet she clutched like a lifeline. "Policies don't hold children in the snow," he said quietly. "People do." The room went silent. Even the monitors seemed to hesitate. Creston adjusted her coat unfazed. "If you interfere, Mr. Reed, I'll have to report you for obstruction." She turned and left her heels clicking down the hall, a rhythm colder than the snow outside. Emma's voice broke the silence. "She's going to take me, isn't she?" Mason crouched beside her, his hand firm over hers. "Not while I'm breathing," he said. Through the window, snow began to fall again, gentle, defiant. Mason watched it swirl and realized something. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. It was about every child who'd ever been left to the cold because a form wasn't signed. He took out his phone, his reflection sharp against the glass. "Victor," he said, calling his driver. "We're not done. Find me everything on a woman named Creston and on St. Mary's paperwork." Outside, the city glimmered under thin sunlight. Inside, a man who'd once buried his hope just made his first move toward justice. The hospital morgue was colder than the storm outside. Metal drawers lined the walls, each marked by a small white tag, swinging in the air, vents breath. Mason had been there too many times in his life, but this time he wasn't burying a memory. He was searching for the truth. A young night nurse led him through the corridor. "Sir, you really shouldn't be down here." "Then you didn't see me," Mason said. His tone wasn't angry, just certain. He stopped beside drawer number 47, where Lily's body had been kept. He pulled the handle. The cold mist rose like a sigh. For a long moment, he couldn't breathe. The little girl looked as if she was only sleeping, her lashes dusted with frost, her small hand still clutching the purple yarn bracelet. He bowed his head, whispering, "You kept her safe, as long as you could, didn't you?" The nurse hesitated. "There's something strange, sir. When the body came in, the name tag didn't match the hospital record. It said Lydia Carson, age 3. But the girl who came with your child survivor, her name was Emma Cole." Mason's eyes sharpened. "You're saying the tag doesn't belong to her? It's not supposed to happen, but..." The night was chaotic. We had multiple frost victims. Someone might have switched the ID bands. He took the metal tag into his hand. "Lydia Carson, room 214. Record 714. Can you access the files?" The nurse bit her lip. That would be against protocol. Mason looked up the kind of look that didn't ask twice. Moments later, she slipped him a flash drive. "If anyone asks, you didn't get this from me." Outside, the morning had turned to glass. The streets shimmered under sunlight that didn't warm. Emma was waiting in the hospital lobby, a stuffed bear from a volunteer resting on her lap. "Did you find her?" she asked. "Not yet," Mason said softly, "but I found something that shouldn't exist." He crouched, holding up the tag. "This belongs to another child, not Lily. I think someone made a mistake or tried to hide one." Emma's brows furrowed. Hide. Sometimes people cover their wrongs even in places meant to heal. He stood pulling out his phone. "Victor, I need a favor. Go to St. Mary's Archives, 3rd floor, East Wing. There's a record number 714. Bring me a copy of everything." "Understood," came Victor's calm voice through static. "Should I be discreet?" Discreet, Mason said. "And fast." Hours later, as evening painted the city grey, Mason sat in his car, reviewing the files Victor had delivered. The report for Lydia Carson ended abruptly. Declared deceased before arrival. Body transferred to county morgue. But the attached photo wasn't Lily. It was a different child, similar age, same blanket, but brown eyes instead of blue. Someone had swapped the records. Mason's jaw tightened. He scrolled further and found a list of signatures on the burial authorization, including one that froze him in place, C. Creston. He stared at the name until the letters blurred. The woman from Child Services hadn't just enforced policy, she had signed off the lie. A storm built quietly inside him. Not the kind that roared, the kind that waited. He looked at the sleeping child in the back seat, Emma's tiny hand still holding the bear. "You were right," he whispered. "Heaven didn't take her. People did." He opened the glove compartment and pulled out an old folder, the one he hadn't touched since his wife and daughter died. Inside were court documents, lawyer contacts, and one business card he'd never expected to use again. Judge Alan Pierce. Mason slid the tag into his pocket beside it. The metal was ice cold, like a promise. "If they buried lies," he said under his breath, "I'll dig up everyone." The Escalade started its headlights, slicing through the frost. For the first time, the storm wasn't outside, it was behind his eyes, burning steady and white. The next morning, the storm on the streets wasn't snow, it was headlines. Every local station carried the same breaking news: Millionaire abducts child after morgue dispute. Mason stared at the television in disbelief as reporters crowded the hospital gates. His face filled the screen, grainy footage of him carrying Emma through the snow. The headline scrolled beneath questionable motives behind late-night rescue. Victor burst through the door, phone in hand. "Sir, it's everywhere. Creston's department leaked the story to the press. They're painting you as unstable, claiming you're reliving your daughter's death." Mason's jaw clenched. They're scared. They're hiding something. Maybe, but public opinion's against you now. They can file for temporary custody within hours. He turned to the hospital window. Outside, reporters flashed cameras through the glass. Emma sat in her bed holding the same bear from the night before, small, quiet, unaware of the chaos swirling beyond the window. "I'm not leaving her," Mason said. "You may not have a choice," Victor warned. "They've already requested a security escort." Minutes later, the door opened. 2 uniformed officers entered with Ms. Creston behind them, her expression carved from ice. "Mr. Reed," she said, voice clipped. "You've interfered with state matters. Until your mental stability is reviewed, the child will be placed under protective supervision." Emma clutched the blanket tighter. "No, please don't take me." Mason stepped forward, shielding her. "You call this protection? You buried her sister under a fake name." Creston's eyes flickered, then hardened. "You're delusional, sir. Please step aside." The officers moved closer. Mason's pulse hammered, but his voice stayed steady. "You think I'm afraid of headlines? I've already buried my family once. I won't let you do it again." The tension cracked. Emma began to cry. The older officer hesitated. "Sir, please don't make this harder." Mason knelt beside Emma, brushing away her tears. "Do you trust me?" he whispered. She nodded, trembling. "Then listen, no matter what they say, you're not alone." Creston gave the signal. The officers lifted Emma gently as she cried out, "Mason, don't let them take me." He didn't fight, not yet. He just stood there, letting the storm inside him turn to steel. As they left, Victor's voice broke the silence. "What now?" Mason picked up the metal tag from the table, the one marked Lydia Carson. "Now," he said, "we show them what they buried." Outside, the cameras flashed, voices shouted, snow started to fall. Again quiet, but relentless. Each flake hit the window like a heartbeat, and Mason whispered to himself, "They can take her for now, but they won't keep her." He turned toward the door, his reflection in the glass sharp and cold. The war had begun, not with guns, but with truth frozen and patient, waiting to melt through the lies. The courthouse stood like an iceberg under a grey sky. Reporters crowded the steps of microphones glittering under falling snow. 3 days had passed since Emma was taken. In every headline, Mason Reed was the villain billionaire obsessed with orphan widower in delusion. But today, he would speak for the first time. Inside the courtroom was cold enough to see breath. The judge, Alan Pierce, a man Mason once called a friend, adjusted his glasses and looked down at him from the bench. "Mr. Reed," he said, voice steady, "you are accused of obstructing an official investigation and withholding a minor from state custody. Do you wish to make a statement?" Mason rose slowly. His suit was dark, his eyes tired but burning. "Yes, Your Honor. I came here because a child was left to die in the snow while the system debated paperwork, and because the same people accusing me signed off a false death certificate to bury the truth." A murmur rippled through the room. Creston sat at the prosecutor's table, her smile faint but brittle. Mason placed a small metal tag on the evidence stand, Lydia Carson, record number 714. This tag was found on a body believed to be Emma Cole's sister. The name doesn't match. The hospital records were altered and the signature authorizing the burial. He looked directly at Creston. Belongs to the woman now calling me unfit. Creston's attorney objected immediately. Objection irrelevant and unsubstantiated. Judge Pierce raised a hand. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Reed. Mason nodded to the back of the courtroom. The nurse from St. Mary's, trembling but resolute, stepped forward. I worked that night, she said. The ID bands were switched. The child labelled as deceased was still breathing when we loaded her out. I wanted to correct it, but Ms. Creston's office sealed the report. Gasps broke out. Cameras clicked like thunder. Creston's jaw tightened. This is slander, she snapped. That woman's unstable. Mason's voice rose. So was my daughter when she froze to death because no one listened. And now you call this one unstable for telling the truth. The judge struck his gavel once, but Mason didn't back down. You talk about protecting children, yet you use their deaths to polish reports. That ends today. For a long moment, the room fell into perfect silence, just the whisper of snow outside the tall windows. Then Judge Pierce leaned forward. Ms. Creston, this court will review these documents immediately. If any falsification is proven, you will face criminal charges. Creston paled, her composure cracking. You have no idea who you're fighting, Reed, she hissed under her breath. I'm not fighting, Mason replied quietly. I'm finishing what you buried. He turned toward the gallery where Emma sat between two social workers, clutching the same purple bracelet. Her eyes met his, wide, tearful, and shining with something new belief. The judge nodded to Mason. Mr. Reed, you will temporarily retain custody of the child pending further investigation. The state's case is suspended. The gavel struck once sharp as lightning. Emma's chair scraped against the floor as she ran forward. She threw her arms around Mason's waist, burying her face in his coat. He held her close, his hand trembling against her back. Outside the courthouse, bells began to ring through the snow. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but Mason didn't answer. He simply looked up at the falling sky and whispered, "You did it, Lily. You brought her back." The snow swirled like confetti in the wind. Not the storm's cruelty this time, but something gentler, almost like grace. Snow still fell outside the courthouse, but it no longer felt cruel. The storm had spent itself. Now, it only whispered. Mason walked out, holding Emma's hand, small, warm shaking as reporters called his name. He didn't stop. His focus was fixed on one thing, the truth he still hadn't uncovered completely. By evening, Victor returned with the final file from St. Mary's. His gloves were wet from snow. "You need to see this," he said, sliding a folder onto Mason's desk. Inside were photos time-stamped the night of the blizzard. One showed a nurse carrying a child wrapped in a grey blanket, but the timestamp was hours after Lily's recorded time of death. Another image showed an ambulance rerouted to a private clinic north of town. Mason's pulse thudded in his ears. She's alive. He and Victor drove through the storm again, headlights slicing through the ice. The road wound up a mountain ridge toward a facility marked St. Agnes Recovery Center. Inside, dim lights flickered behind frosted glass. A nurse met them at the door, startled by their urgency. "We're looking for a girl admitted 3 nights ago, age 3, Name could be Lydia Carson or Lily Cole. The nurse's eyes softened. Room 12. She's sleeping. Mason's steps faltered as they entered. There, under a heated lamp, lay the smallest heartbeat of hope. Lily, her hair slightly darker now, her chest rising and falling in fragile rhythm. Emma gasped, rushing forward. Lily, the little girl, stirred her lashes, fluttering open. When her eyes met her sister's, a faint sound left her lips barely a whisper, but enough. Emma broke sobbing into the blanket. Mason turned away for a second, pressing a hand to his face, the heat of tears cutting through years of frost. The doctor spoke gently. She was misidentified during transport. Severe hypothermia, but she'll make it. You got here just in time. Mason looked down at the two sisters reunited under the lamp. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out the purple yarn bracelet, now frayed from his pocket, but still whole. He slipped it around Lily's tiny wrist, tying it carefully. There, he whispered, "Now you're both warm again." Emma looked up, her voice shaking. "Does that mean we get to go home?" Mason smiled, though his voice caught. "Yes, but not just any home. Our home." For a moment, the three of them stood together, a man who had lost everything and two children who'd lost everyone. Snowflakes drifted through the window light like glowing feathers. Victor watched quietly from the hall, whispering under his breath. Guess heaven wasn't missing one more angel after all. Outside, the snow melted on the windshield of Mason's car as dawn broke. For the first time in 3 winters, the ice gave way to light. A year later, winter came again, softer this time. Snow fell outside the wide windows of a house on the hill, where yellow light glowed through the glass. Inside, laughter echoed against the walls that had once known only silence. Mason sat by the fireplace, his hair touched with grey, a quiet smile warming his face. Emma was curled beside him, reading a story aloud to Lily, who sat cross-legged on the rug, clutching the same purple yarn bracelet between her small fingers. They had built this place together, the Harbour Light home, a shelter for children who'd lost someone, a sanctuary where grief could thaw. Every photo on the wall carried a name once forgotten by the system, now remembered with love. Emma's voice faltered at a word, and Mason leaned in to help her. "Hope," he said softly. "It means believing the snow will end." She smiled, repeating it like a promise. "Hope." Lily giggled, holding out her wrist. "Mine's still purple." "That's because it's never let go," Mason replied. The fire crackled. Outside, wind brushed across the porch, carrying the scent of pine and distant bells from town. Victor entered quietly with mugs of cocoa. The volunteers are back from the shelter downtown. Another little girl's been found alone but alive. Mason nodded. "Bring her in. No child waits outside in the cold." As Victor left, Mason looked toward the window. Snowflakes drifted under the porch light, glowing like falling stars. He whispered the words that had become his prayer, the one born from pain, now turned to peace. Justice may come late, but it never fails. He turned off the lamp, leaving only the gentle firelight that danced across their faces. Emma's eyes closed. Lily leaned against her shoulder. "No more dark," Mason said quietly, and the world outside seemed to listen. In moments of pain like Emma's, or in the choice to rise again like Mason's. Have you ever witnessed kindness appear just when it was needed most? If someone like Emma were near you today, what would you do to ease her fear? Share your thoughts below, because even one comment can be the light that guides someone who feels lost. And how are you doing lately? If this story touched your heart or brought a tear to your eyes, I hope it also left you with a little warmth, a reminder that no matter how long the night lasts, our light and yours is always waiting at the end.